Call station, rifle gunshot, 8-0-06. Contact your cruiser for rebound, over.
In this documentary, we explore the untold story of the man who saw war as his destiny. A soldier from birth, George S. Patton, was as much a warrior of myth as he was of reality. His name invokes images of tanks storming across enemy lines, soldiers under his command charging into the heart of battle, and the unyielding will to win. But Patton's story isn't just about battlefield victories. It's about the mind of a man whose relentless drive and audacious strategies turned the tide in some of World War II's most crucial moments. Welcome to the General's War. To understand George S. Patton, we have to start with where it all began. Born in 1885, Patton grew up in a family that cherished military service. His ancestors had fought in the American Revolution and the Civil War, and from an early age, young George was convinced that war was in his blood. He believed that he was born to fight. Patton's upbringing was one of privilege, but also of intense discipline. He attended the Virginia Military Institute before moving on to West Point, where his performance was mixed. Academics weren't his strong suit, but his passion for military history, strategy, and, above all, cavalry training set him apart. In 1916, Patton saw his first taste of action in the Mexican border campaign, riding alongside General John J. Pershing. But it was World War I where Patton's star began to rise. He became one of the early pioneers of tank warfare, commanding tank brigades during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Though the war ended before Patton could make his full impact, it was clear this was only the beginning for the man who would later become one of World War II's most feared generals. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, George S. Patton was more than ready. He had spent years refining his thoughts on mechanized warfare, and his moment came during the North African campaign. The year was 1943, and the United States was struggling against the Germans, led by the brilliant General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Patton was called in to take command of the U.S. Second Corps and turn things around after a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Kasserine Pass. Patton wasted no time. His first act was to instill a sense of iron discipline among the troops. He was known for his no-nonsense attitude and demanded that every soldier under his command be prepared for battle at a moment's notice. Helmets were worn at all times, boots were polished, and orders were executed without hesitation. Patton's presence electrified the U.S. forces. Soon after, the U.S. forces, reinvigorated under Patton's command, began to push the Axis back across the desert. In a series of quick and decisive battles, Patton's tactics proved effective. By May 1943, the Axis forces in North Africa were defeated, and the Americans had their first major victory in the European theater. But Patton wasn't satisfied with the victory. He had his eyes set on Sicily. Patton's next major campaign came in Sicily, where the Allies launched an amphibious invasion in July 1943. Patton was given command of the U.S. 7th Army, and once again his aggressive nature shone through. He saw warfare as a race to the finish line, and he was determined to win. His main competitor, British General Bernard Montgomery. Patton viewed Montgomery with equal parts respect and rivalry. As the British forces moved towards the city of Messina, Patton launched his own ambitious campaign, driving his troops through mountainous terrain, outpacing the Germans and liberating key cities along the way. The race was on, and in the end, Patton won. His forces reached Messina just hours before Montgomery's. But for all of his battlefield triumphs, Sicily was also the site of one of Patton's most controversial moments. During the campaign, he visited a field hospital and famously slapped two soldiers suffering from what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder. He accused them of cowardice and ordered them back to the front lines. The incident caused outrage, and Patton was forced to apologize publicly. For a moment, his career was on the line. But despite the scandal, Patton's military genius could not be denied. As the war progressed, it became clear that the Allies would need every bit of Patton's audacity and determination in the battles to come, and his most iconic moments were still ahead. By the summer of 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy was well underway. But after the initial landings on D-Day, the Allies found themselves bogged down in the hedgerows of northern France, locked in a brutal and slow-moving fight against the Germans. Patton had been sidelined during the initial phase of the invasion, much to his frustration. But in August 1944, he was given command of the U.S. Third Army and tasked with leading the breakout from Normandy. Patton wasted no time. In what became known as Operation Cobra, his forces burst through the German lines, utilizing his hallmark strategy of fast-moving, mechanized warfare. Tanks, trucks, and infantry moved with lightning speed, cutting through German defenses and racing through the French countryside. Within days, Patton's Third Army had liberated vast swaths of territory. Patton's breakout from Normandy was one of the most dramatic moments of the war. His forces advanced nearly 60 miles in just 2 days, trapping thousands of German soldiers in what became known as the Falaise Pocket. By the end of August, Patton had liberated the French cities of Orléans and Chartres, and his troops were closing in on Paris. Patton's relentless advance across France earned him both admiration and fear. The Germans regarded him as the Allies' most dangerous general, while the French saw him as a hero. But as fast as Patton's army moved, it soon hit a wall, one that even the great general couldn't overcome alone. Patton's advance across France had been so rapid that it outpaced the Allied supply lines. Tanks and trucks needed fuel, and Patton's forces were running dangerously low. In September 1944, his advance ground to a halt near the German border, just as the Third Army was preparing to cross into the heart of Nazi Germany. Frustration boiled over as Patton pleaded for more supplies, but the reality of logistics meant his forces would have to wait. The halt at the Siegfried Line, the formidable German defensive line, was a bitter pill for Patton to swallow. His momentum had been stopped not by the Germans, but by a lack of fuel. But the war had a way of changing, and soon enough, Patton would face a new challenge, one that would test his leadership and tactical brilliance like never before. December 1944. The German army, battered but not broken, launched one final desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes forest. Known as the Battle of the Bulge, it was Adolf Hitler's last gamble to split the Allied forces and recapture the vital Belgian port of Antwerp. The initial attack caught the Allies by surprise, and American forces were quickly surrounded in the town of Bastogne. As panic spread, the Allies turned to Patton. In one of the most remarkable feats of the war, Patton redirected his entire Third Army, over 100,000 men and thousands of vehicles, 90 degrees to the north, in the middle of winter, through snow-covered roads, to relieve the beleaguered troops in Bastogne. Within 48 hours, Patton's forces had reached Bastogne, breaking the German siege and turning the tide of the battle. The Battle of the Bulge was a decisive victory for the Allies, and it cemented Patton's legacy as one of the greatest military commanders of the war. With the German forces in full retreat, Patton's Third Army resumed its march into Germany. His forces crossed the Rhine River in March 1945, and from there, they advanced deep into the heart of the Reich. Town after town fell to Patton's relentless advance. By May 1945, Nazi Germany was defeated, and Patton's war was over. But for Patton, victory was bittersweet. He was a man born for war, and peace did not come easily. He clashed with Allied leaders over the post-war occupation of Germany, famously suggesting that the Western Allies should be preparing to fight the Soviets. In December 1945, just months after the war ended, Patton died in a car accident in Germany. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy would live on. George S. Patton was more than just a general. He was a symbol of American grit, audacity, and the will to win. His tactics and leadership style are still studied in military academies around the world, and his larger-than-life persona continues to captivate the imaginations of those who study history. This was the General's War, the story of a man who saw war as his destiny and led his men to victory, no matter the odds. Thanks for watching this interesting story of George S. Patton. If you enjoyed the story of this legend, please watch other videos on this channel, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more compelling stories from the past. Have any thoughts or questions? Drop them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.